they're speaking are the ones that kind of hang around more often anyway.
Okay.
So, typically if the commissioners, speak at some point during each hearing, they tend to be the ones that take over the screen.
All right. Well, it's 7:00. Is Mark there? Mark, are you there? Can Mark? Yeah, it's 7:00 now. Okay, I'm ready to roll. Okay, Mark. All right. Good evening. It is April 21, 2020, and this is a meeting of the Shrewsbury Conservation Commission. As a preliminary matter, this is John Ostrowski, Chair of the Conservation Commission. Please permit me to confirm that all members are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Martha Gatch,
Yes.
Jason Port. Jason. Did we lose Jason? Let me go to Bob.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm here.
Okay. Bob Jakes
I'm here.
and Polito.
Here.
Support staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Brad Stone.
Here.
Andy Truman. Andy is not going to be here tonight, Brad?
He's here. His microphone is muted.
Yeah, sorry. I'm here. Sorry.
Okay. Okay.
Present.
All right. This open meeting of the Conservation Commission is being conducted remotely consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of the public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Shrewsbury Conservation Commission is convening by video conference via Google Hangouts Meet, as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer unless asked by the chairperson or the staff person. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. We are now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate accurate meeting minutes. The chair will introduce each presenter of an agenda item. After they conclude their presentation, the chair will go down the line of members first, and then to support staff, and lastly to the public for questions or comments. Please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Remember that unless a document is being shared, your camera feed is triggered by your speaking or background noise. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. The chair will ask members of the public who wish to speak to identify their names and addresses only. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. All right, now moving into our actual agenda. Our first item is to review and approve minutes. There are no minutes to review or approve tonight. The second item is to sign the bills. Brad, were you able to find out if there were any bills that we need to sign? Brad?
I get a chance to look into that. The
Okay.
likelihood, though, is that we do have one from the newspaper anyway.
All right, so you'll include that in anything we need to sign when we come in to do our certificates and orders.
Yes. Correct.
Okay. All right, moving on to item 3, our meetings and hearings. Our first hearing, it's a continued public hearing. It's regarding the notice of intent filed by Volponi Real Estate LLC for the construction of a house, well, and septic system at 25 Kingston Street. James Tatro, I believe, is representing here.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
James, you want to give us an update?
Sure. I'll be very brief because there's not much that has changed to the plans since they were last before the board. All we have done in taking over the representation here is that to achieve infiltration of driveway runoff, we added a proposed 18-inch wide, 18-inch deep crushed stone trench on both sides of the driveway to the erosion and sediment control plan and the off-site water main extension and details plan previously submitted. And we also added another plan titled the Driveway Infiltration Plan, again showing this proposed trenching on both sides. We also changed the notation for the proposed driveway from being pervious pavement to just standard asphalt, as it was probably impractical for such a small driveway to consider to be pervious pavement. And I just want to note one other item, which was that after submitting these plans to the commission, your agent, Mr. Stone, noted that there was a concern about a stand of about 4 trees in the town property, but close to the property line nearest the house. And I went out, took some pictures, and verified that is the case. There are some trees close there, and I would just note that the applicant would have no objection to a condition in the order requiring him to install a split rail fence along 2 property lines there, the 30-foot and the 60.53-foot long property lines that are between the house and septic system and town land and these trees to discourage encroachment. And I'll leave it at that. That's the only issues which we have touched on, and I will try and answer any questions.
Okay. Martha,
I have no questions.
Jason,
No questions.
Bob,
James, I have a question with regards to the sloping around the backside of the house. What is that slope and how do you intend to stabilize it?
Hold on. Bear with me just a second, please.
I'm limited because the plan I'm looking at is so small. So is it a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1? Or?
It is actually a 3-to-1 slope. I just had to make sure I was putting the correct scale to the plan.
Okay. So you'll just stabilize it by hydroseeding it?
Correct.
Okay. All right. No more questions, Mr. Chairman.
Ken,
No questions.
James, just a quick question for you. This is the one with the tree cutting, correct? All the trees that were
That's
cut
correct,
on town
Mr.
property.
That's correct. There were 5 trees, all closer to Kingston Street than the ones I was just mentioning. 5 trees which were cut on town land, which shouldn't have been. And the plans provide that in each of those instances, there'll be a new tree planted in approximately that same location.
Okay, Martha, did you have a comment on this in the past regarding density of the plantings?
I am not remembering. Density of the plantings. The trees?
Correct. They took down, I think they were, Brad, were they maple trees?
Couple
I
oaks
see.
and maples.
Yeah.
If you want, John, I can pull up the plan.
Yeah, why don't you try that? Let's see if that works.
I see 3 oaks ranging from 10 inches to 20 inches and 2 maples of about 10 and 12 inches.
Are you
She's
able
correct.
to see the plan?
Yeah.
John, is it okay if I speak?
Yeah, go ahead, fine.
Okay. So the plan shows some of the trees that were removed. Is my cursor moving with the plan as well?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So in that area, you see some oaks and some maples, some within the Kingston Street as well. There certainly were more than this, and I do have photos on my computer, just not handy to pull them up, but there were some closer to the front property line by the home as well. And a couple of quick points. Any replacement of trees in this area, we should make sure that they are not host species. So the maple, for instance, we don't want to replace the maple with maple. We want to make sure that they're not ALB friendly trees. The other thing, and James mentioned this a little bit, there were some trees standing in this area right here on the town parcel. My concern there, in addition to the encroachment, was whether or not those trees were going to be too close to the house, that you might have some canopy overhanging them, or some other reason that homeowner may in the very near future want to remove those or approach the town to remove them, or something that was going to interfere with the house. That was one of the things I had asked James real recently to take a quick look at, and I think he went out in the field to do that. The other part was what was brought up earlier by Mr. Tatro was the some type of a barrier to prevent encroachment, and I believe the proposal would be to put a split rail fence along this frontage boundary here. That would help possibly prevent somebody from taking over this town parcel here and more or less making that their front yard. I would suggest that it also run up this side property line, at least for a short distance, just to kind of define that 90-degree angle as well. So, again, if the contractor went in and removed a bunch of trees on a piece of land they don't own, then, chances are the homeowner is not going to know where their parcel is either at some point.
All right. Brad,
Yep.
you said you spoke to James about that line of trees close to the property line and, potentially overhanging the home. Did you guys resolve on whether that they should come down and get at this point, not at
So
the town?
we exchanged emails so far. I haven't had a chance to speak to him, but we've got him here now.
Okay. James, why don't you
Yes.
address that?
Sure. I don't believe there's any significant overhang of those trees, their canopy onto the lot in question at right now. I can't say that if they became much more mature and bigger that there wouldn't be some. But I was standing right at the 90-degree bend of the property, and I don't believe there was more than just a few feet of overhang from one tree.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Bob.
I would propose that we condition the order of conditions on a submittal of a landscaping plan that would indicate the location, the type, and the caliper of the trees to be replaced, to be approved by the Conservation Commission or its agent.
I tend to agree with that.
I
As a
would have no
condition.
objection on behalf of the applicant, Mr. Chairman.
Okay,
And Mr. Chairman, if I might recommend that in lieu of maples, hickories be considered?
sounds good to me. James? Note that.
I have no problem. My only question, Mr. Chairman, we actually were looking to plant hickory on some site recently and found it seemed to be a tree that very much liked sandy soil. I guess this would be appropriate. It was all loamy sand, so I guess it's still an appropriate thing. So I think we'd have no problem with that.
Okay. Any other recommendations, Martha?
No.
No. Okay, Brad, do you have anything further on this project? Brad?
If the commission's okay with working out the trees and using Martha's suggestion with the hickories for the maple, I think we can condition that appropriately. The only other question I have is if you want that fence to go beyond the frontage that was suggested, how far down that side property line would you want it if you want it at all?
I would say at least, 3 10-foot sections, 30 feet or so, if anybody else has a comment on that.
Well, I think the fence and the delineation of the fence should be included in that landscaping plan that will be submitted and reviewed.
How long, Bob? That's the question, going down the drive, by the side of the drive.
Let them propose what's reasonable, and if we don't like it, we can ask them to adjust the plan.
Right. Okay, anything else, Brad?
No, I think I'm good with that one after that. Yep.
All right, Andy?
No, I'm gonna say, I see the biggest issue was the porous pavement. We just kept saying, are you sure this is really what you want? So
Right.
one of the big reasons we were keeping it open, but yeah, the trees, I remember now the trees had to be resolved. No, I'm all set.
Okay. All right. Does anyone in the public have any questions or comments on this hearing? Okay, I'm waiting. I don't hear any. Is everyone in favor of closing the hearing tonight?
No objection.
Brad? No objection? I'm waiting for Brad to have a buy-in because of the planting plan. Brad?
I'm all set. Yep, I'm okay with the commission closing it.
Okay. Okay, there being no further questions or comments, we'll close this hearing. Okay, moving on to our next hearing. The next one on the agenda is a continued public hearing regarding the notice of intent filed by Salim Aoud for the construction of retaining walls and associated site work at 203 North Quinsigamon Avenue. John Grenier was the engineer on this last I knew. And I don't think we've heard anything from them, Brad, since the last meeting.
I have not heard anything from them. I know in the past with this particular one, they reached out to Andy as well. So Andy, can you confirm that you haven't heard anything from John at this point?
No, I haven't heard anything. I'm honestly not expecting to say this is the one where he's trying to find a PE that will sign up on the wall, which I don't think is going to happen, but so no, I haven't heard anything.
Okay, so if anyone doesn't have an objection, we will continue this until our next meeting, which is Thursday, May 14th, 2020. Okay, moving on to our third item on the meetings and hearings agenda. It's a continued public hearing. It's actually, when I say continued, it's a postponed public hearing. We read the notice at the last meeting. It is actually a new public hearing, and it's regarding the notice of intent filed by South Shore Realty Trust for site work associated with the repair to an existing stone wall at 6 Tatasset Circle. Is someone representing Ken?
Yes,
And are you going to recuse yourself on?
yes, I'm going to recuse, but if I have to answer any questions, I can answer a question if needed.
Okay, is there anyone, Ken, do you know, presenting on this one tonight?
Should be Kevin Quinn.
All right, Kevin, are you on the feed?
I saw him a minute ago.
Yep.
Kevin
Quinn.
Kevin was with us. I think it looks like he fell off. So
He's there, he's
Ken.
still muted.
Do you see him, Andy, on the feed?
Yeah, I see him on, he's doing something with his video, but he's still muted, so.
If he's muted, he's
I can
just
see him
muted.
in the video, it's just he's gone again. So. He is there though.
Mr. Trekkie?
Kevin Quinn. Ken, is there a way to call Kevin on his phone and tell him to enter?
I will try.
Okay.
Well, should we move on and get back to him?
Well, then we're gonna move, well, let's just wait for Ken. We don't want to lose Ken on the next one.
John, while I'm thinking about this, if for some reason it showed his microphone was off,
Yep,
if for some reason the mic's not working, he can also call in with his phone and do voice that way. So he can have the computer running for the video
okay,
and call in separately with the phone if that's what the issue was, because his camera
Okay.
seemed to be working, the mic was off. That's just an option.
okay. Hopefully, Ken can reach him either via phone or a message. We can tell him that.
John,
Yes,
he's gonna call in. He's having a problem with his microphone.
okay.
He's
So
gonna
what,
call you now. She should be.
okay, we'll sit tight for a minute. I see Kevin's, okay, just had Kevin, Brad. Brad,
Yep.
how will we know when Kevin comes in on this? Do we have to click on him or?
Kevin, if you can hear me, your microphone's muted by the software. So I just want you to see that you're aware it looks like it may be a software issue and not a hardware issue. So if there's a way on your computer you can click the mic, that may resolve it. Otherwise, you're dealing with something we're unfamiliar with.
Actually, I don't know, whoever's running the meeting, sometimes you can unmute people too. I don't know who's set up the meeting.
Yeah, I can mute them, but I can't unmute them. So that I've been through already.
No, it's worth a try.
Okay.
They have to push. They have to push *6 to unmute.
It says Kevin Quinn trying to get a phone line in. Kevin,
All right, do you hear me now?
Is that Kevin?
That's me.
Kevin, it's John
Yeah, we-
Ostrowski.
Well, I'm glad to get through.
That's good. All right, Kevin.
All right.
What we've done is we've read the notice. Ken's recusing himself from this hearing.
Mhm.
And if you want to give us a quick presentation on 6 Tacit Circle.
Certainly, yep. All right, first of all, Kevin Quinn with Quinn Engineering. I'm here on behalf of South Shore Realty Trust regarding Plum Island, which is also 6 Tacit Circle. There are retaining walls on Plum Island that are currently unstable and failing. We have identified these walls in 2 categories. What we call, and this is in your narrative, what we call type 1 are walls that are in full collapse. What we call type 2 are walls that are either in partial collapse or collapse is impending. For walls which have collapsed, we propose to rebuild the walls during the drawdown of Lake Quinsigamond. For walls which are unstable or which have partially collapsed, we propose to do work above the high water line at any time of the year, including during the non-drawdown period. All work from the high water line down would be done during the drawdown. We also propose to remove stones from the wall in areas that will not affect the lake, will not impact the lake, basically from the high water line up, and store those stones to be reused when we rebuild the wall around the perimeter of the island. Once the repair has been completed, we will backfill the wall with soil and loam and seed, stabilize it. There's basically 4 resource areas that we're talking about here. The interface between the lake and the retaining wall is bank. It's subject to temporary disruption while the wall is being repaired. The dimensions and the location of the wall will not be changed as a result of this work. We don't propose to change or alter the wall other than to restore it. This is a repair. So there's no decrease or increase in bank. The lake itself, land underwater body, again, the repair will only be a temporary impact. Once the wall has been repaired, there's no permanent alteration proposed. The area surrounding Plum Island is mapped by FEMA as flood hazard zone X. It's also, or bordering land subject to flooding under the Wetlands Protection Act. No impact to bordering land subject to flooding or flood hazard is proposed. And finally, the project is within priority habitat of rare species. We have filed with the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program, and on February 10th, the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife issued a letter to conservation with 2 findings. One is that the project will not adversely affect habitat, and under MESA, the Massachusetts Endangered Species Act, the project will not result in a prohibited take of rare species. Alteration proposed. The area surrounding Plum Island is mapped by FEMA as flood hazard zone X. It's also, or bordering land subject to flooding under the Wetlands Protection Act. No impact to bordering land subject to flooding or flood hazard is proposed. And finally, the project is within priority habitat of rare species. We have filed with the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program, and on February 10th, the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife issued a letter to conservation with 2 findings. One is that the project will not adversely affect habitat, and the project will not result in a prohibited take of rare species. Alteration proposed. The area surrounding Plum Island is mapped by FEMA as flood hazard zone X, also, or bordering land subject to flooding under the Wetlands Protection Act. No impact to bordering land subject to flooding or flood hazard is proposed. And finally, the project is within priority habitat of rare species. We have filed with the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program, and on February 10th, the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife issued a letter to conservation with 2 findings. One is that the project will not adversely affect habitat, and under MESA, Massachusetts Endangered Species Act, the project will not result in a prohibited take of rare species. Alteration proposal. The
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Kevin,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yep.
there's a lot of sounds coming, they're garbled from the computer right now.
Right. So,
Let me hang up my phone.
Yep,
You hear me now?
I can hear you now, yeah. I can hear you now. Go ahead. Look, you got to unmute your phone. You got to unmute the machine, the computer. Kevin,
Yes, I can barely hear you.
okay. Yeah, I can hear you perfect now, but it was all garbled a few minutes ago.
Were you able to hear my presentation?
All the way up until about the last 3 minutes when you were talking about the Endangered Species Act, you were going through the findings that were negative. Kevin?
1 minute.
Yeah. I see you, Kevin. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. For some reason, I'm still having a problem with my speaker, but I can hear you now.
We can hear you fine. I can hear you fine now. I'm
Okay.
assuming the other commissioners can too. Can everyone hear Kevin? Brad?
Yes.
Okay, Jason can. I'm
Yes.
assuming. Okay, good. All right. It sounds like Bob. Bob, are you there? Bob? Well, Kevin,
Yes.
why don't you?
I'm
why don't you
here.
go
I hear
ahead?
him.
Yeah, okay, you hear him. Good. Let's have Kevin pick up from about 3 minutes ago, Kevin, where you were in
Okay.
that presentation.
I did discuss resource areas. Was that part of that, or?
Yes, you were in, I heard that pretty well.
All right. So
Yeah, I
there's
heard that
basically-
well, the bank and everything else, so.
All right. Yeah, there's basically 4 resource areas. The interface between the lake and the Rhett Wall is bank. It's subject to temporary disruption while the wall is being repaired. Once the permanent, I should say the permanent location of the wall will not be changed as a result of this construction. So there's no permanent alteration, increase or decrease in bank as a result of this work. The lake itself is land underwater body. Again, the repair will result only in temporary impact. Once the wall has been repaired, there's no permanent alteration to the land underwater body. The area surrounding Plum Island is mapped by FEMA as Flood Hazard Zone X, or bordering land subject to flooding under the Wetlands Protection Act. No impact to bordering land subject to flooding or flood hazard would take place as a result of this work. And finally, the project is within priority habitat of rare species. A submission to the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program was filed, and on February 10th, the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife issued a letter to conservation with 2 findings. One, project will not adversely affect the habitat, and under MESA, the Mass Endangered Species Act, the project will not result in a prohibited take of rare species. Can I answer questions of board members?
Okay, Martha.
I just have a clarification question.
Yes.
You mentioned that you would be doing some work during the drawdown period, but other work during a period of high water. Can you just help me understand how you can work on
Yes.
the top of the wall first and then go back and work on the bottom?
Right. The line that we're drawing is the high water line. And what we would suggest, in order to be able to get as much done as we can, we'd like to work on the wall where we can above the high water line at any non-drawdown period, or any time of year, drawdown or not drawdown. The wall, where the wall has collapsed and we have to go below the high water line, then we have to do that work during the drawdown period.
Okay, thank you.
Are you all set, Martha?
So,
Jason?
No questions. I'm fine.
Bob?
No questions.
Kevin,
Do you
the
have any?
wall,
Yes.
the wall construction,
Yes.
it looked like it was just the dry rock wall, no masonry.
We have not specified that it would be, whether it be dry laid or mortar joint. We like dry laid because it's more of a stable, it doesn't rely on the mortar for stability.
Correct.
But it's a little bit of a talent. You have to have a talented wall builder to be able to do that. So we've left that unspecified is what I'm telling you.
Okay. Brad,
Yes.
any comments? Questions?
Just a couple of quick ones. With respect to land subject to flooding, now the FEMA map usually takes precedence here, but we also have a observed elevation that the commission is well aware of by now from when we had a heavy amount of rain. Although it was less than a 100-year event, it was quite a bit back in, I think it was March of 2010. So we got a measured elevation from the lake at that time. That elevation happens to be the existing elevation for most, if not all, of that wall. So in the event that that wall somehow were to get built a little bit higher than it is today, it wouldn't be impacting any of that particular observed land subject to flood and elevation. So I'm not concerned there, like I would be, for instance, with other wall projects in the lake because of their location and the grades around them. The other thing too, I think I pulled up the plans and the pictures that you probably saw. So it was clear that you've got an existing wall there. A portion of it's fallen in. There's no doubt about it. Like we have had some doubts on other projects. It looks like it's a pretty easy repair to do, and I don't see an issue with it.
Is that it, Brad? Brad, is that all?
Yes, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Andy, any questions or comments?
No, no questions. I'm all set.
Okay. Does anyone in the public have any questions or comments on this hearing? I'm not hearing any. So I assume we have none, and we will close this hearing. Kevin?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't hear any questions or comments coming at us.
Okay.
So if the commission is okay with it, we will close the hearing. All right, Brad?
Very good.
Okay, Kevin. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Yep. Be well, all.
Okay.
Good night.
All right, moving on to another new public hearing. We read the notice at our last meeting. This is actually postponed from our prior meeting. It's a new public hearing regarding the notice of intent filed by Wheelabrator Millbury, Inc. for the Phase 5, Section 7 baseliner construction at the Shrewsbury landfill, 620 Hartford Turnpike. Do we have a presenter tonight?
Yes, this is Don Musial from Wheelabrator. Can you guys hear me and see me okay?
I see you fine, Don.
All right, perfect. So with me tonight here, I have Chris Sturgis of Wheelabrator. He's our environmental manager for the facility. Also with us is Chris Donor, who is a project engineer with CEC, Civil and Environmental Consultants, who's our designer for this project. And what I'll do is I'll give you a brief overview of what we're looking to do, and then I'll turn it over to Chris Donor, and he can talk about more of the specifics, and together we can all answer any questions that the commission may have. So what we're looking to do this summer is construct the Section 7 baseliner increment. This is part of the Phase 5 expansion, which was originally permitted back in 2009. We constructed the first segment of that expansion in 2010, 2011, and 2012. And that's where we've been operating since that time. In 2016 and 17, we constructed the next segment of the Phase 5 expansion, and that was called Section 6. This past summer and fall, we completed the final piece of that Section 6 baseliner, and that's under permitting now for authorization to operate with Mass DEP. Continuing on along the same progression, this summer, we're looking to construct Section 7, which is the final segment of construction of baseliner in the Phase 5 expansion. And this is entirely on top of the town of Shrewsbury's old municipal solid waste landfill. So it's entirely a piggyback on top of the town's old landfill. And it's the area closest to Route 20, in the corner between Centec Boulevard and Route 20, right behind the gas station. So it's an area that we've been using partly for stockpiles of soils from the original excavations back in 2010 and 2011. We've also been using that area for the town's leaf and yard waste composting operation for the past 10 years as well too. So this area is up against the tree line, up against Route 20, up against Centec Boulevard, where there is a wetland corridor that runs between the landfill and the gas station. The town of Shrewsbury's landfill goes right up to that tree line that's out there. So the work that's being proposed is within the buffer zone, the 100-foot buffer zone of the wetland itself, but no work being proposed within the wetland. So it's all buffer zone work. The closest we would get to the wetland is 30 feet. For the most part, the entire tree line along that area remains as is. And there's actually some segments of the town landfill that are closer than 30 feet to the wetland boundary, but we'll still stay further than the 30 feet. And this cell here, this will grant us capacity to operate for not quite another 10 years, but at least another 8 to 9 years of just continued operations at the site. It's just part of the natural progression of the site. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Donor from CEC from his living room. So Chris, take it away.
Thanks, Don. So as Don mentioned, the purpose of this project is the last part of the site development, Section 7 of the landfill. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay. The project's going to consist of site grading, surface prep, the installation of the respective soil layers and geosynthetic layers of the landfill, along with the associated infrastructure, leachate collection system, stormwater management system, and some other infrastructure such as the perimeter berm, which, as Don mentioned, is the main focus of this application. The drawings show on sheet C300. Do you want me to present that plan, Brad, or do you want to pull it up?
Chris, do you have it right there? Can you put it up?
Yeah, I should be able to.
Yeah, why don't you do it? Because you have quite a few pages in your set.
Okay. Can everyone see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So as Don mentioned, this is Section 7, which is the last section of the development for the project. Along the western side is our perimeter berm for the cell. The existing wetlands are shown in the blue, and then a 25-foot buffer shown in red, along with the 100-foot buffer shown in orange. So most of the work that we're doing, as Don mentioned, is over the existing landfill, and is within the 100-foot buffer, but no work is proposed within the wetland, and we will only get as close as 30 feet to that existing wetland. Prior to construction, the contractor will install the silt fence at the toe of the berm. The berm is going to consist of soil placement and structural lifts, and then the exterior of that berm is going to be loam and seeded, and then stabilized. We do have a C-SWIP for this project. It was submitted as part of the application for the Section 7 construction project. And as final grades are reached, we will loam and seed that exterior berm to protect against erosion. There is no other major work proposed for the project in this area. It is all just berm work to build up that existing perimeter berm. As part of the application, HydroCAD analysis was completed, which compared the pre-development stormwater flows and the post-development stormwater flows. That was also included in the application. We're not proposing to change really any of the areas or any of the flows. We're just adding a berm in that section. So all of the areas stayed the same. And based on that analysis, all of our post-development flows are less than the pre-development flows according to our model. We have one other small change that we're going to be doing in Stormwater Basin 4, which is adding a 6-foot or a 6-inch section of solid pipe onto the existing standpipe. That work isn't anticipated to involve any machinery, but we'll just add that piece onto the existing standpipe that's in the area. So as I mentioned earlier, we do have a C-SWIP. We will be loaming and seeding. We'll be installing silt fence on the beginning of the project. We'll be monitoring those throughout the project, and we'll be adhering to the C-SWIP until construction is completed on the project. Does anyone have questions?
Actually, yeah. So this is Don Musial again here. Chris, if you could unshare your screen, that would be good. Okay. So just a couple other points there, just to follow up on Chris, and then we can turn it over for any questions. Is that the perimeter berm itself is being constructed with soils that are the existing soils from, well, two soils, but soils from the existing on-site excavations from the original Section 5, Phase 5, Section 5 development that we've stockpiled on site. So these are those glacial till soils that we're all used to in the area. We understand the importance of the stormwater controls and the siltation requirements and flocculants and the extra measures that are required for this type of soil. It's very clay. We're right up against that tree line that's there, and the controls will be very tight in those areas. We have a lot of experience with those soils on site. And some success as well, which is really important to us. Also, the soils that we'll be using on the site for that perimeter berm are soils that we've been stockpiling that were coming from the Beale Street, the Beale School project. There were certain soils that we had approval from Mass DEP, and the town received approval to reuse those soils at the Shrewsbury landfill rather than paying for them to be either reused at some other site or disposed at some other site. So these are soils that we've been stockpiling for this berm as well. And then the other point I just want to note is that the actual edge of the landfill, the actual waste containment is, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is the 100 feet from the wetland boundary as required by siting regulations, correct?
Yes, at a minimum, yes.
Okay. And with that, I turn it over for any questions from the commission.
Martha.
I have a question. I'm looking at a black screen. Is anybody else?
No.
No. Okay.
Were you able to see the drawing, Martha?
Not Don's drawings. When
Yeah.
Chris unshared his screen, and
We just, apparently Martha's feed just went offline. I think Martha's got a computer issue going on right at the moment. So why don't we go to Jason and we'll wait for Martha to come back in.
No questions for me at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Bob?
No questions from me.
Ken?
No questions.
I have a question just on the silt fence. I know we're layering this on top of the existing landfill. That silt fence, is that going to be installed at the top of the existing landfill where the new berm meets it?
Chris, would you like to take that?
Yeah. So based on the existing conditions at the time of construction, we'll install that just beyond where our disturbed area is going to be, keeping in mind that with that existing cap, we won't damage anything. And that vegetative support soil of that existing cap is fairly thick. So we will make sure that silt fence is just down gradient of any of our disturbed areas for the project.
Okay, so basically it's at the top of the existing landfill.
For all intensive purposes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yep. And when you discuss this as being the construction of the berm only, obviously the ash, ultimately it's the containment for the ash, and that is going to be built out over the next 8 to 9 years. So in terms of the stormwater management within that bermed area, can you just address that a bit, Chris? You lost me a bit on that.
Okay, yeah. So as that area is built up within the cell, Wheelabrator has an O&M plan, so they manage stormwater as well as leachate within that cell while they're operating. And then as the heights reach above that perimeter berm, they will also install stormwater controls as needed to control that stormwater. And all of that stormwater will be discharged into the existing stormwater basins that have already been previously constructed and sized for full build out at the site.
Okay, so as you're building out the cell, and when I say building it out, using it for ash storage, any water that percolates through that is leachate, basically, and that gets treated separately, correct?
Correct.
And once you do complete sections of that cell, final, and you're doing your capping, that's when you're into your stormwater management, when you finally do your final cap out of that cell in 8 or 9 years down the line.
Correct, or as they reach final grades, correct.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
so this is Don here. I
Yeah,
can speak
Don.
to that a little bit. So during the operations of the facility, so we have our initial construction and the exterior berm is vegetated and no erosion from that. As we're operating and filling up with ash, we have requirements to place intermediate cover on the exterior side slopes. So
Okay,
any slopes that would be shedding rainfall as non-contact water to the exterior requires to have a layer of soil on top of the ash, so that there's no runoff that has contacted ash that is leaving the baseliner area. Any water that has contacted the ash is collected by the leachate system, which is then discharged to the town of Shrewsbury sewer system. And so that's done in increments of operation as we go forward over the next 8 to 9 years, ultimately leading up to final capping, which would be installation of the same type of high density polyethylene layers over all the ash and soils, and then soils on top of that, clean soils and vegetated for the long term.
okay. Brad, any questions or comments?
So I'm okay with the project. Just a quick comment though for the commission. The wetlands that were shown on this plan were originally delineated many years ago. I have been out there a few times in the past to see them. It's not a site I would expect them to change really dramatically over time, especially this short amount of time. With everything that's going on, I didn't have enough time to coordinate a site visit just to recheck that line. But I'm comfortable with using what they've done in the past. I wouldn't expect any change there here. So that's my only comment on that, and the rest of it I'm okay with.
Okay. Andy, any questions or comments?
No, I'm all set at this time.
Okay. Does anyone in the public have any questions or comments on this hearing? All right, I'm not hearing anybody chime in, so I'm assuming there are no questions or comments. And if we don't have any objections from the commission, we'll close this public hearing. All right, Don?
Okay, thank you all very much. Stay healthy.
Okay, thanks, Don. Okay, that concludes our
Hey, John.
meetings. Yes?
John, sorry, let me interrupt you real quick. We skipped over one, I believe. The one on the first page
Oh, I'm sorry,
for
Nelson
two
Point.
Nelson
Yes,
Point
we're
Road.
on one. You're absolutely right. Yep. Okay, Yep, we have one other hearing. It's again, a new public hearing. We read the notice at our last meeting. It's regarding the notice of intent filed by Nelson Point LLC for the construction of a single-family home at 2 Nelson Point Road. Do we have a presenter tonight for Nelson Point? Is anyone on the feed for Nelson Point tonight? Brad, that was BSC as the engineer on this project?
Yes, BSC was the consultant, I believe, and the project proponent, Mr. Brown, did have some communication with him today through email.
Yeah.
So I know that they're aware the project was tonight, so we could always come back to it, or
Why don't we do that? Yeah.
okay.
Well, if there's no proponent, it seems to me we should continue this till someone's here to present the plan.
Yeah, I mean, if you can remind us, Bob, let's continue it. We'll go to the end of the meeting in case she pops in. I think it's Melissa Kaplan.
Okay.
And then we'll do the continuation. Is there a phone number to reach her at, Brad?
That's what I'm gonna check and see. I'll look into that while you go on with the rest of the meeting if you'd like.
But we're gonna need you for the other items, so. I'll let you
Okay.
look it up.
Okay, so the consultant on the notice of intent did not respond to the invite. Mr. Brown did, though, I believe. So let me just see if I can get a hold of him.
Hello? Hello?
Hello? Yep.
Yes, hi, it's David Brown.
David, it's John Ostrowski. We have your.
Yeah, I have you up on the screen. I have you up on the screen, but you obviously couldn't hear me, so.
Okay. Do you want to give us a little bit of a update on this, David?
Sure. So let me just quickly outline the material for you. So this is a proposed single-family house construction at the corner of Lake Street and Nelson Point Road. You may remember about a year and a half ago, we presented the same plan to the commission. It's an unusual lot in that it's steeply from front to back, and because it's on a. Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Can everyone hear me? Okay.
I can hear you fine, David.
Okay. Yeah. So if everyone can hear me,
Yep. Yeah, there's a little bit of feedback in the background, but you're coming across loud and clear.
Okay. So let me just say that, let me just turn this thing down a little bit here. Okay. So as I mentioned, it's the proposed construction of a single-family home at the intersection of Lake Street and Nelson Point Road. When we submitted this plan about a year and a half ago, because of the nature of the topography on the lot, and because of the 30-foot setback requirement, because it's on a corner, we really couldn't fit the house on the lot and comply with both the setbacks and the commission's informal 30-foot setback from the bordering vegetated wetland line. So we at that time proposed a house that would have encroached within that 30-foot informal buffer I think it was about, by about 10 feet or so. We didn't think we had any alternative, so we appealed that denial of the commission to the DEP. They denied our appeal on the basis that we hadn't tried to obtain a variance from the Shrewsbury Board of Appeals. So we then filed a variance request with the Board of Appeals, and that was actually granted to allow us to build the home within 16 feet 8 inches from Lake Street. That allowed us to then resubmit this plan with the 30-foot setback from the wetland line. So it's the same plan that you saw a year and a half ago. It's about a 1,000 square foot footprint. It's a fairly small house. It's a 3-bedroom home.
Okay. You ready for questions, David?
Sure. I mean, the one I did, Brad did mention earlier today that we didn't provide detail on the retaining wall, and we're in the process of getting that information from the engineer, and would obviously submit that to the town engineering office before we obtain the building permit.
Right, because the wall is fairly high. It's roughly 12 feet.
It is, yes, yes.
12 feet
Well,
high.
it's 8 feet. It's 8 feet at the highest point, and there'll be a fence on top of that wall.
Okay. All right, let's go to questions. Martha,
I'm all set.
Jason,
I'm all set too.
Bob,
No questions.
Ken,
All set.
Brad?
So, like Mr. Brown was saying, the house was relocated. It does meet the guidance setback now. The only thing I did have concern about was a detail for the wall. And I do want to have that detail in place, not at the building permit stage, but as part of the order of conditions. So if the commission's okay with conditioning it tonight, and we get that information shortly thereafter, we'll send the order out for that. But I don't see any issue handling it that way rather than, continuing the hearing, for instance.
Okay. Andy,
I have no questions.
does anyone in the public have any questions or comments on this hearing? Okay, I don't hear anyone chiming in from the public, so I will assume there are no questions or comments. And barring any objections from the commission, I will close this hearing.
Thanks very much.
Okay, all right, David.
Take care.
Thank you.
Yep. Be safe. Yep. Thank you.
Bye. All right, that finally takes care of our meetings and hearings, and do you want to go into the orders of conditions right now, Brad?
I think we still have quite a number of people here participating. They're probably here for other agenda items. So if the commission's okay with skipping that, we can probably go down to, do you want to start with the enforcement order discussion and then work our way back?
Okay, that's fine.
That makes sense.
Is that where most of the people are waiting?
I'm speculating. Again, I can only see some numbers at times, but
Okay, that's fine. So why don't we take it in order? The first enforcement order or discussion of an enforcement order is 214 Lake Street. It's the Beal School construction.
okay.
Why don't you give us an update, Brad?
So do you want me to give a quick overview, or has the commission had enough time to look at everything that I put in the packet, or?
I just give a semi-detailed overview. Don't give a condensed one, just to lay out the history here so we know what we're doing moving forward.
Okay, well, I'm just going to bring up a couple of quick visuals anyway, just so anybody that's not familiar with this at this point can start to see it as well. So just give me one quick second to get to the right folder. So back on April 3rd, when these images were taken, this is when I noticed some turbidity downstream in Meadowbrook at about a mile and a half away from the school construction site. And even though the turbidity there wasn't terrible, knowing the area, it looked like there was probably a much bigger problem upstream, because it's a pretty good sized watershed. For it to have that amount of discoloring in it, something had to be going on. I knew there was nothing in the immediate area there, so upstream it was probably a much bigger event. This is a GIS snapshot of the surrounding area. So near the top of this photo is Route 9, and then you have Lake Street down through here, and over in this area towards the left is Oak. The beaver dam that I was looking at was actually the very lower left corner of this image, down by, well, I think it's 350, but it's across from the number you see there, which is 321 in this portion of the stream, very lower left. So again, I've had some history with the Beal construction site back when the Glavin Center was there and it was actually being operated by the state. There was an illicit discharge into the storm drainage system there at the time. So I knew where that system was located. I knew where it ultimately discharged. It was actually a sanitary discharge at the time. It wasn't a stormwater one. It was a pretty significant problem then, but it brought me up to speed with the knowledge of the area, and it kind of helped me trace what was going on in Meadowbrook back to this site. So up here, parcel 214 is where the school is currently being constructed. What you see here is obviously the old layout from the Glavin Center. And I went to the discharge location at 420 Boston Turnpike, as it was the first portion where that stream opened up from upstream stormwater infrastructure, just to see if I could isolate the area where the stream might first become discolored. And that's when I saw there was quite a bit of sediment. There was a pretty significant load being discharged at that upper, if you see where I've highlighted a red X with a yellow highlight around it near the corner of the building for 420, that's where it goes into the stream. From there, I suspected, knowing that the school was under construction and it was a big site, that was going to be my first place to look. I drove up Route 9, came down Lake Street, looked at both sides of the road, saw quite a bit of disturbed land. As I was coming from Route 9 down Lake Street heading south, even looking at what was immediately on either side of the road, quite a bit of unstabilized banks that were collecting water. It was silt laden and running down the shoulders of Lake Street. I could see that making its way onto the construction site, and also across the street to the parcel to the east, and going through what was the farm field. And I could see some pretty good sized rills kind of carrying the water heading east towards this direction here. Once I saw that, I continued down Lake Street, kind of went up Topsfield, Sherrill Drive, knowing the area. When I got to the end of Sherrill Drive here, I could look off into the woods and see that there was a pretty good sized plume in the wetlands. So you see the stream on the GIS, but there is standing water all around there, particularly in the spring. And you could see a silt laden plume going through there. So I get out of the car. We have a drainage easement on this house right here, located at 27. I went through the drainage easement out into the woods and saw, again, there was a second area where the existing stream was brown, not as bad as the location to the west, but there was still quite a bit of silt getting down in this area. From there, I went back to the office and started looking at information we had, trying to pull together information on the school, information on other things that might be in the area. One of my colleagues had mentioned to me at the time, who I think is actually here for the meeting now as well, that there was some construction going on Industrial Drive. and it's at this location up towards the top middle next to 420 here. We do have a separate stormwater permit for our stormwater bylaw. I looked at that. There's quite a bit of open land there. Actually, I think it's 3 right here. So there's quite a bit of open land there. When I saw it, I got concerned that that site could be a problem, and looked, even though it wasn't discharging much at the time, if it was raining heavier, there was a catch basin there that was at risk. When I pulled that information and went back to the site, the rain had pretty much died down at the time. Nothing was discharging from the site. Quickly went back to 420, and you could see that the sediment was still in heavy loads, quite a bit of flow, still running. So something else was going elsewhere. After the fact too, it appears that this drainage in Industrial Drive does not go this way into this outfall. It would more or less have to go uphill to do that. So I don't think that's how it would discharge from this area anyway. When I went back later up in the day, I did have the opportunity to meet with a few of the people who are involved with the project. I walked to the back property line with them, and if you look at where this building here was for Glavin, in these homes at the top of Sherrill Drive here, there is a pipe that from the Glavin Center that came from this location, and an easement that runs parallel all at the back of these properties. And if you just follow my cursor, it eventually makes its way down here and discharges where this X is. So looking at that drainage that's installed, there were some structures back here that per the project plans do tie into that. I think what may have confused some of the people involved with in the project in the past, and they can speak for themselves after, but the structures that are there, the water that's ponding up around them, it's not discharging the tops like a manhole or catch basin. It's not going over the frames. It's getting the joints or other openings, whether it's through an open orifice below the water, or even under the uncemented frame on top of the structure or something else. When you stood near them, you could hear a lot of flow, which you would expect from a site like that because most of it's draining back there. So as that water's ponding up, there's a lot of flow underneath it, getting into those structures, making its way down the pipe and through that stream. So it was a pretty significant discharge. With a site that big, it's not surprising. It was a lot of sediment. It's more than we typically see for construction sites. But then again, this project's also got a lot more exposure than most in town as well. Since that particular day, the team there has been very supportive and has tried to get on top of this, and they've been pretty upfront in responding to me in the past from April 3rd on. I will say on my end, I have not been able to be as involved or active as I normally am, just because of the circumstances and a lot of other things that we have going on at the moment. So I have not made it back out other than to drive by the site and see the work that they've done, and read through most of what they've sent me. And I've had a couple of conversations, but unfortunately, normally I'd be more involved at this point in trying to see that things are getting correct. But they do appear that they are actively trying to correct the problem. They have been, sending me communication after communication without my asking for it, which is great to see. Frankly, it's been a better response than we usually get when we have this type of circumstance. So anything else you want to hear from me before we turn it over, John? Or
No, I mean, they've also responded, I believe, once you pointed out the problem, did they send you a letter confirming your findings? And
There's
have worked to rectify the problem?
Right. So there's a number of things that I put up in the Google Drive. You know, they've supplied photos. There's emails that things they've looked into. They've got another consultant team on board to try to correct the problem as well. So, like I said, they're making the effort to correct it, and you know, certainly not ignoring it. I don't think there's any question that what happened came from the school site. I don't really think that's debatable, but I think that you know, at this point they're trying to address what's there. I do have some concerns just because of the size of the site that, you know, any BMP measure you take at this point may be working right now, for instance, but with the construction going to be ongoing, it's something that's going to have to be monitored more regularly. At the end of the day, if everything seems to be working now, and I don't know that for sure at this point, but hypothetically, if it was, I'd still want to see some monitoring, some ongoing communication, you know, keeping the commission involved. What I didn't mention at the very beginning is that there was no order of conditions for this site because it wasn't in an area of our jurisdiction until the violation.
Brad, how do we assess any of the damage done from all the siltation that ran off? Is that something that hasn't been done at this point and would need to be done to see if there's any mitigation required?
So in terms of damage, and knowing that area, knowing the watershed, the size of that perennial stream, that sediment's long gone. So it's gone well off the site. It was visible 2 miles downstream. There's a very large swamp, maybe partial wet meadow. There's a very, very flat area from Oak Street all the way down to Lake Quisigamon. I think, if I remember off the top of my head, is about a 6-inch grade change from there. So the last mile stretch roughly of that stream is pretty flat. And the reason I know that is because of beaver problems we've had in the area. Once the lake has that annual drawdown, that stream disappears. A lot of the water around it does, and the beavers become active. So in terms of typical wetland impacts and mitigation, we can usually find an area of a wetland that's silted in, and you may want to go in and remove the silt. You're simply not going to find that kind of an area here. It's well diffused at this point. You want to prevent it from happening again, but there's not going to be any spot you can go out to and say, here's a bunch of silt we need to remove from the construction site. It's everywhere and spread out downstream at this point.
Okay. So moving forward, without an order of conditions for this site, we really have no way to guide or participate in making sure that there aren't future problems, and it really only leads us to an enforcement order that would require monitoring and reporting for the course of the construction. Brad, do you agree?
Well, if you're asking my opinion, then in terms of if the commission wants to continue to watch this, make sure it doesn't happen again, that kind of thing, I wouldn't suggest doing an application at this point. I would probably go with the enforcement order tool. Again, the only reason I say that is because the response has been good so far. So there are a number of times where I don't have that comfort level, let's say, with projects, and you want them to get the permit in place and have that attached to the title and other things so that We know that, potential buyer, for instance, if the title changed, they weren't going to inherit the problem. The response here has been good. I hope and expect it to continue. So, a monitoring requirement, working with the DPW, the engineering department, conservation agent, in terms of making sure that all the corrective measures are working and continue to work. That's probably the way that I would suggest the commission handle it. And the tool for that would be an enforcement order, just to make that a little bit formal.
Okay. Would any of the commissioners like to give an opinion at this time?
Well, Mr. Chairman, it seems to me that the most expedient way to go about this is to go with the enforcement order, require complete site stabilization as soon as possible. Apparently, for the most part, it perhaps has already been done, but I think it should require that and any monitoring requirements that we feel are appropriate. And it seems to me if we were to ask for a notice of, if we're filing for a permit, that puts you into a bureaucratic process that takes too long. Whereas the expedient way to do this is with an enforcement order.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Martha, any comment?
I'm wondering what measures can be taken to stabilize the site. I know nothing about that whole construction process, but it does strike me that in just driving through it, there's an awful lot of disturbed land at the top of the hill. And I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that.
So
I would agree, Mr. Chairman, and I think that's what the enforcement order should require.
Yep. Okay, Jason.
John, hold on 1 second. If I could interrupt, rather than the commission at this point try to figure out what's best, we also haven't heard from anybody involved with the site itself at this point, and I do think they're here. So it might be beneficial for you to hear what they've done so far, and then if there's anything else you'd like to see, you can kind of go from there, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Brad, you have to take your presentation down. Okay, it's down. Do we have anybody representing the site here tonight?
This is Keith Baldinger, Public Buildings Division Manager for Town of Shrewsbury. I believe Frank Pear from Fontaine is on and Kevin Smith from PMA are on. I think one of those should unmute themselves and probably speak.
Okay. Will one of you two unmute and tell us who you are, please? I'm not hearing anything, Keith.
Brad, do you have directions for how to unmute if you're dialing in? You need to unmute.
So it should be the way you normally unmute yourself with your phone, if that's how they dialed in. So
Yeah.
it's
Looks like Frank's on a cell phone and that's how he dialed in, so.
I'm just looking to see the numbers here that show up. So I can see it looks like his number is there, Keith, but he's muted. And I don't have the ability to unmute someone. I would say, Frank, if you're there and you can hear us and you can't unmute your phone, I would try to hang up and call back at this point.
Keith, who was the other fellow you said that was also supposed to be on tonight?
Well, I believe Kevin Smith from PMA is on. Who is the other person that Brad met with?
Kevin, can you hear us?
So it looks like Frank hung up, so he's probably trying to dial back right now. So it takes a minute to dial the number and then enter the PIN number.
And Kevin Smith never responded.
Right.
That looks like Frank. Frank? Nope. Still not working. Brad, can you tell if Frank has tried to dial back in?
So I don't see the number that was there before. Somebody else just joined. I don't know if they're trying on another line.
Brad, what was it? #6 or something? If they're calling from a landline to unmute.
That I don't know off the top of my head. All right, so someone's here now.
I'm sorry. This is Kevin Smith. I work for PMA. I'm out on the site. I missed a little bit of the conversation. I wasn't sure if Frank was able to get through.
Kevin, this is John Ostrowski, the chairman of the Concom, and yeah, Frank has not been able to connect with us. So we heard from Keith just a minute ago, but he's deferring it to you two guys to give us an update as to what happened and what is going on right now.
Well, I was the person that met with Brad out on the site, and initially we didn't think it was our fault or that we were causing it. But once Brad got there and showed us what was going on and listening to the water, and then personally checking out those two sites where Brad had marked out those X, it was clear that it was coming from our site. And since then, T&M has placed a lot more gravel around the catch basins, and also up the amount of wattles, the straw hay bales around there. They've also put flock blocks in there, and that's for the site that goes out to the fallout. As far as the silt going down Lake Street, we've placed a lot more hay bales, and we've hydroseeded that area. Also increased the amount of gravel and silt fencing that we had there. And I think we've got a pretty good handle on the Lake Street side of the sediment. The other side that's going behind the residential areas, we thought we had done a pretty good job, but then last Friday, the rain went up and over everything we had put in place. We have since doubled that and created another fallout area to try and catch as much of the runoff as possible. T&M has hired OTO to another engineer on top of Mitch to help guide us. And we've been reaching out to Brad for any updates or suggestions and site visits to help us solve this.
Kevin, this other company you hired, what's their specialty?
silt mitigation. They are engineers to deal with the tribulation or the runoff from this and the water, how to protect the wetlands
Okay.
in delicate areas. They're specialists at this.
Well, that sounds like it's needed, yeah. Okay, is Frank back with us, or is he still having trouble connecting?
He can only hear us. He can't. He
Okay.
can't unmute.
Yeah, that's how I was. I had to call in.
All right, Keith and Kevin, why don't we go back to the commission now that we got a little better idea where you guys are at, and figure out how we're going to proceed forward with this. Brad, you mentioned the enforcement order to document what we would require for steps going forward here to make sure that we don't have future occurrences of this. And it sounds like they're working on it, but we need some way to have control of the process also. So why don't we take a roll call of commissioners to see if going the enforcement route is the way we should proceed. And we'll start with Martha.
Hello? Hello?
Yes. Who's this?
This is Frank Pear. I'm sorry.
Oh,
I could hear
Frank.
the whole thing.
Okay.
I apologize. I was hitting *6, but it would not let me in.
All right. Do you have anything to add to this, Frank? What's your role in the project, right?
I am the project manager for the Beal Elementary School for Fontaine Brothers,
Okay.
and I oversee the entire construction project. I've been involved with the project from the beginning, and I will be with the project till the end.
Okay.
Everything Brad said was very accurate. Everything Kevin Smith from PMA said was very accurate. We did hire O'Reilly, Talbot, and Oakham. They're a professional civil engineer firm out of Western Massachusetts area. Immediately when Brad brought this to our attention, and he put into place some best practice measures for us to implement, and they have been done. I believe that part of the issue that we had was that the site over the winter was nice and frozen, and now that spring is around the corner and things are loosening up, and we started bringing materials to Wheelabrator, and we had the perfect rainstorm for this to get all of our attention back into, we need to make sure that the sediment stays on the site. T&M Equipment, our site contractor, has taken all of Mike Talbot's recommendations to heart and has implemented them. I've been sending the information to Brad via photos, emails, the report that Mike put together for us, and we need to just do a better job to make sure that this silt stays on our site.
Okay. All right, Frank, we're gonna.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Bob.
John, if I just like to say, I think it seems that they've responded very appropriately to this, and everybody seems to be on the same page. But I think as a matter of record, we should issue an order memorializing all of the recommendations that Brad has summarized for us, and requiring that they hire this consultant, which they already have. But I think as a matter of record, we ought to formalize this with an enforcement order.
Okay.
And
No,
I would make that motion.
Okay. Do we have a second to Bob's motion?
Second.
All right, thanks, Ken. Do we have all in favor? Now I'll do a roll call. Martha?
Aye.
Jason?
Aye.
Bob?
Aye.
Ken,
Aye.
and John Ostrowski, aye. All right, so we have a unanimous decision. We'll do the enforcement order, and Brad, you can work out some of the details you want to see in reporting and follow-up.
Yes, I mean, I can certainly, use what we've standardized in the past in terms of the monitoring requirements. But if there's anything in terms of frequency or reporting or anything else that the commission wants to, make sure is in there as of tonight, you can talk about that now. Otherwise, we can talk it over in our office and do what we think is appropriate as well. I don't have a problem going that route. Like I said, they've been super to work with so far.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
yes,
can you have them come back at the next meeting and give us a report of what they've done?
that sounds good, Ken. Yeah, that's a good idea. Okay, Keith, Frank, and Kevin?
Yep.
You've heard that we'll do an enforcement order. And also we'll put you on the agenda again for our next meeting for an update.
Okay.
Face-to-face update. Well, it may not be a face-to-face update, but our next meeting is going to be May 14th. Yeah, it's a Thursday. It's an off-schedule day from the Concoms, but May 14th is the meeting date.
Okay.
Okay?
You got it.
All right. Thank you very much.
Evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. You want to do Cherry Street next? Brad, 59 Cherry Street.
Okay, so I'm just gonna pull that one up. For those of you that have been on the commission longer than others, this particular site was the, give me a minute to get to the drive. So this is what was the former, I believe it was the Adams Farm 2 site that was permitted mid-2000s roughly. So let me just scroll up here. Okay, so to the left of the upper left corner is Cherry Street. If you were to head left off page, that's heading west. Eventually through the woods there, you'd get to the Adams Farm development and then Route 140. If you went north, you would get to Route 9. And if you went south along Cherry Street there, you would eventually get to Gold Street. So I don't have the original project plans available. They're actually in archives at the moment, which is pretty challenging to get to currently with the library being closed. So I was able to get this particular sheet from the engineering firm that did the original design work, and they've been involved with a future project plan for this site as well. If anybody's been paying attention to what else is going on in town with different boards, this was recently before the Board of Selectmen for a zoning change. I think the proposal was to do a over 55 development here, and it does need some changes in the zoning to accommodate that, I believe. The planners would know more on that part than I do, but that was the reason. I think it was in front of the Board of Selectmen. And I did watch that meeting for that particular presentation, and it looks like that process is going to be pushed off a little bit, again, because of everything we're going through at the moment. So I don't think anything's going to happen to the site very soon. I was waiting for that part to be over before I brought this to the commission. But what happened was there was some soil testing done on the site. In this area, in here up towards the top left, there's a wetland line that was previously marked. And also there's just down paved that the other side of the wetland. And there is green that goes through it in some areas. And recently, to accommodate soil testing, the project team there, they used an excavator, a pretty large excavator from the looks of it, came in through the wetlands and to access the upland and do some testing in the upland. It did look like there was a pretty wide area that was, the vegetation was pretty chewed up. The earth, you could see where the tracks had gone right through. I do believe Andy was out there before I became aware of it. And his first comment was he thought there was a little bit more wetland in this area here than what was shown on the plan. And I do believe, looking at it, there may be a little bit more there as well. But there's roughly a good 150 feet or so by 10 to 12 feet wide or so, just swath that was just cut and disturbed to access that area. So people in our, myself, we reached out to the engineers that we knew were involved for the testing. They provided us with this plan. In their explanation, if you can see on red here, it says try to use this path. I think that's what they provided the excavator operator to access the area. So historically, there was some logging that was done at one time. This particular plan was from, I'll scroll down and see the date. It looks like it's 2005. So there was some logging done there before then. And I think what this existing 15-foot wide covered path is trying to show is how they access the site for logging to, presumably cut trees down on the rest in other areas in the upland. So there's not actually an upland path there or like a protected path that would allow machines to go through or anything like that. It's a swamp, and it's very wet. There was standing water where the machine went through in a lot of areas, and it got pretty beat up. I did reach out to the engineer that was involved and, basically, asked the question, why weren't we notified? You really should have gone through conservation for this. It's not an exempt activity. Soil testing in the buffer zone is an exempt activity, but you can't alter a wetland to get to that activity, for instance. So it's, it kind of reiterated that at a minimum, the conversation needs to start with me, and then we could guide him as to how best to approach the Conservation Commission in the future to, get approvals for something like this and also try to prevent it from happening. Typically for something like this, even when you have DCR forest cutting plans, which I presume was done here in the past, and if memory recalls, many years ago, I do think I saw something for the site regarding that. There is a procedure for accessing through the wetlands. Whether you lay out swamp mats or something else, you do want to protect that area. You don't just want to drive a machine through a swamp to access it because it poses damage. So knowing that there's probably no project coming through in the near future in terms of a notice of intent for the Conservation Commission, I wanted to bring this to your attention to see if there's anything at this time in terms of remediation through enforcement or something like that. I don't have any pictures on the drive at the moment. I took some from the road, but it's I can tell you it was, if you can picture what a large track machine going through a swamp would do, that's exactly what it did. It's pretty disturbed. I think that at a minimum, a wetland scientist should look at that entire path and see if any adjustments to the grading might be necessary to get the ruts, or if any any planting might be necessary, or if in terms of revegetation, you just let Mother Nature take over in that particular area. Most of it's a path, and if left on alone for years, will probably come back, or would be a wetland, and in my opinion, may be okay letting nature take over. As you get closer to the road, there was a much larger area disturbed than just the path, and that's something that the commission may want to look at closer themselves, or have get a consultant to look at and report to us as well. But again, I was a little disappointed it happened. It's just you think you wouldn't take a machine go through a swamp like that, but it did, and I just wanted to bring it to the attention of the commission and see if there's anything else you want to do regarding it.
Okay, is there any proponent from that site here tonight? Okay, I don't hear anyone, so I'm assuming nobody is representing that site. It sounds like it's a pretty clear enforcement issue, Brad. And if someone on the commission would want to make a motion to issue an enforcement.
Before we do that, can I ask Brad or Andy, since I think you said you saw it, when did this happen, and about how big an area is disturbed, would you say?
So we got a call. The way we found out is we got a call from the neighbor. Just trying to go through our emails to get it. It's probably about a month ago. She said there's an excavator sitting in the front yard, and they started cutting trees down. So Walter and I swung by. There was only the excavator, so we left our card for them to call for them. We never managed to touch bases. But in the interim, Motopalo actually sent me the preliminary site plans that were shown for the zoning amendment change. So we kind of put two and two together. So we reached out to Thompson List, and that's how we finally tracked out who was out there doing the work. So, but yeah, I mean, they were in there. They had a tree puller out there. They were pulling trees out, to clear this path. They didn't even make an attempt to do it nicely. So, but it was probably about a month ago, maybe. So
just to add to Andy's comment, it looks like I was out there March 18th. So, Andy, I'm sure, was up just before then.
And about how long is the track through the wetlands?
Based on the plan that was provided, it looks like it's a good 150 feet anyway. You've got to go through that much of it to get to the upland.
yeah, I would. Yeah, I mean, when I went out there, they just started going in. So I walked up probably at least 50 or 60 feet in. And they say they just started, but they went all the way in to get to the upland. So it's a fair run. It's several hundred feet, I would think.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else with any questions? All right. Does someone want to make a motion to issue an enforcement order?
I would make that motion, Mr. Chairman, that we issue an enforcement order requiring, first of all, prohibiting this activity, but also requiring them to hire a consultant to evaluate the potential damage to the wetland and to make recommendations with regards to its restoration.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
That was seconded by Ken. And we'll do a roll call. All in favor?
Do we have quick discussion, John? Do we want to put a timeline on that for the response?
In terms of evaluating the damage?
Right.
What would you say, a couple months? I mean, no more than 2, maybe, I don't know. These times, if a month is too soon.
Can we say time is of the essence?
Well, nah, that's too wide open. What would you think, Brad? Would be
well, I think you nailed it, John. Normally I would say 30 days. You know,
Yeah,
everything's challenging at this point. So
Yeah.
I would say 2 months seems appropriate.
okay. That's okay with me if it's okay with everybody else. All
Are we
right,
gonna
so,
come to the next meeting, just to give us an update?
yes, that's a good idea. Yeah, to
Yeah.
bring them in.
I'll be going to the part of the property, right?
I would assume, Bob,
Who's probably going to be surprised that any of this even occurred, right?
yeah. But,
Well, I think I say we talked to James just about the work. I mean, it's Stephen Acasa's bought the project to do the development, so
Does he land?
we gave him a heads up then that, you know, it's probably an enforcement order coming, so they shouldn't be surprised.
Who owns the land though? Isn't it? It's probably under option, right?
It's, I don't know if the applicant for the zoning change was Vinacasa's.
Okay.
One of the conglomerates. I don't know if they've owned it or they've got a PNS on it, but they were certainly the ones who were doing the testing. We never did establish who the excavator was because there was no name on the machine, so.
But the property owner will be getting this communication, right? It'll have to go to the owner of the property, a record.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah, we'll have to look on the deed and
Right.
see who owns it.
I think it'd be perfectly appropriate to CC Vinacosta and the engineer.
that's okay. Okay, so where did we leave it off? We were doing a roll call. Martha was good. Jason, did you?
Yeah,
Are
I'm
you
good.
up?
I
Okay,
think it's the
Bob?
right way to go.
Bob,
Yes, I agree.
Ken,
Yes.
and John Ostrowski, aye. So we're all set. Enforcement order, Brad.
Okay.
Where do you want to leap to now, Brad? Should we do the correspondence issue with the beaver or?
Sure. So right across the street, ironically, from that site we just discussed for enforcement on Cherry Street is a pretty good sized area in the swamp behind the homes there that's impounded due to a downstream beaver dam. And I went out to take a look at the person that reached out to us, their property at 62 G Street. And I had others in my office when I wasn't available go downstream and try to figure out what was going on there. And although I haven't seen the beaver dam downstream, other property owners downstream and town staff have confirmed that it's there. And the lots that I looked at where the impoundment is, where the residents are concerned, if the commission recalls, this was one of the lots on, or one of the 2 lots on Cherry Street that shared that wetland replication area that we had struggled with over recent years to finalize the completion of that, as well as there was a landscaping company that came in and redid an entire lawn and kind of just barely went into that area as well. So that's the location where this is occurring. So one of the owners there at that 62 Cherry location was concerned about the water. We looked into it. I've had some discussion with somebody who's on the trustees at the Adams Farm condominium complex. That's where I'm told that the dam is, and that's where even people residing there have confirmed it's there. And it's ultimately at this point, it's a private matter. What I did was I did what I hope was a very detailed letter to explain to the homeowner there what I saw, what was going on, and what the process is in town for beaver management. So the Board of Selectmen years ago, once the beavers took off, implemented a beaver policy in terms of when the town would get involved or when we wouldn't get involved. Frankly, probably because of the man-hours and financial resources it was taken to kind of get all the problems that the beavers were creating under control. So the Board of Selectmen were pretty straightforward with, either the dam has to be on town property in impacting people, or it has to be on private property, but somehow impacting town infrastructure for town staff or other use of town resources to be warranted. And the dam downstream is on private property, and it's not impacting any public infrastructure at this point. We do have a cross-country sewer line from the Adams Farm development that goes out to Cherry Street. That area was on my mind of something we had to look at and be concerned possibly. But elevation-wise, it's well above where the impoundment is at this point. So I wanted more or less the commission to be aware that this particular site was happening, because it's not that you have to get involved or even could, but it's one of those rare instances where the activities aren't affecting one of our roads or our sewer utility somewhere or something causing problems, or it's not on town property. Usually these dams happen on town property somewhere. It's usually a culvert on the street or one of our big open space parcels or something like that. I mean, believe me, we're way too involved in trying to keep different areas in town under control. So we know it's been a problem everywhere, and the commission sees these impacts at times because I'm bringing it to your attention so that we can do emergency certificates when we need to breach the dam or things like that. But the letter was for primarily the homeowners' information, and I shared it with the commission mainly so you'd have a little bit of an idea what's going on there in case anybody reached out to you, as well as I hoped that I was able to highlight the policy requirements and give everybody an understanding of why the town isn't doing more there at this point. From a commission aspect of it, one of the things asked of me by the resident there, well, isn't this a violation of the Wetlands Protection Act, and shouldn't the Conservation Commission be involved at this point? My opinion is no. And in the letter, I explained to them, typically when beavers go out there and they do their thing, they don't often create wetlands, but they do change them, and they make what's a swamp that most of the time doesn't have standing water to something that has more standing water, and they kind of sometimes improve the habitat or ultimately they change it, and we let them be as much as we can without disturbing them. Last year on Oak Street, either last year or maybe the year before, we had one. Again, it was in that area I looked at where I found the Beal School problem recently. It was downstream of that particular beaver dam, but I had let that one go for a couple of months, even with complaints where there was a resident calling other town officials because trees in the woods were falling behind the home. It wasn't in danger of hitting the home, but the standing water was altering the wetlands in the area. And my opinion at the time was it's not hurting anybody's property, not affecting utilities. We'll just let the beavers be. 2 months went by, and all of a sudden the beavers changed their attitude. They impounded a lot more water, and we had somebody's basement that was going to flood at any moment. They had a sump pump, for instance, that was running 24/7. I went to take a look at that particular person's house, and the pump never shut off the time I was there. That became a concern, and if you had a power failure, then that person's house would be flooded. Looking at the neighborhood, there were others I suspect would be at similar risk, and it was probably a matter of they just didn't think to call the town for any particular reason. But we got involved at that point. So, from a wetlands perspective, my first goal is to try to let the beavers be whenever we can, and if they do need to be maintained, then ultimately, as a DPW person, I look and see if we're going to use town resources to do that. So that was the real purpose, was for the homeowner's knowledge in this instance, and I CC'd the commission on it. Just again, it's one of those rare circumstances where the town isn't getting involved in some manner, because it's probably the first one I've seen where it's really not impacting public infrastructure and the dam's not on town land at the same time.
Okay. So, in summary, Brad, it's basically nothing we can do about it right now. It's not, doesn't meet the criteria for any town action.
It doesn't meet the Board of Selectmen criteria for the use of town resources from a wetlands protection overview in terms of the commission with their jurisdiction. Again, my opinion is the beavers are out there altering the wetlands. I don't think it's a violation that homeowner now finds himself under because the beavers created a dam on their property. I mean, this happens everywhere in town. We'd be given, enforcement orders to all these town parcels where it's happening, for instance. I don't think that it's, something we could say that the property owner is at fault because a beaver was there. It's not really causing damage to wetlands. It's changing them slightly, but from a Wetlands Protection Act, you're certainly not losing any, and it's not causing a pollution issue.
Yeah. Okay, does anyone have any other comments on this particular issue? Well, I don't see any, so we'll just recognize it happened and take no action at this point, Brad.
Okay.
Okay. Does the commission, anyone in the commission object to that? I don't see any objection, so okay. We'll do that. And that takes care of correspondence, so let's move up to our orders of conditions. We have quite a few tonight. Bob, would you do the honors of making
Mr.
motion?
Chairman, I would move that we issue an order of condition for 25 Kingston, the construction of a single-family house at 25 Kingston Street, subject to the submittal of a plan, a restoration plan, with regards to the replanting of the trees on the town property that have been removed, specifying the specific trees and their calipers, and also locating a split rail fence along the property line with the town property.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Kenny seconded it, and let's do a roll call. Martha,
Is there any discussion? No?
I think you nailed it. I don't know
Okay.
anything else. I don't have anything.
You did good, Bob.
Yep.
Aye.
Jason,
Aye.
Bob,
Aye.
Ken,
Aye.
and John Ostrowski, aye.
Now, Mr. Chairman, I would further move that we issue a order of conditions for the construction of a single-family home at 12 Nelson Point Road, subject to the submittal of a detailed plan for the construction of the retaining wall on the property.
Yep, that is not 12, it's two, is it 2 Nelson? Yeah, 2 Nelson.
Oh, 2 Nelson, okay, yes.
And there are no further condition, well, the condition, Bob, about the, did you mention the wall?
Yes.
About, oh, well, you did mention the wall. Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Ken seconded. And we're gonna go for all in favor with Martha first.
Aye.
Jason,
Aye.
Bob,
Aye.
Ken,
Aye.
and John Ostrowski, aye.
Mr. Chairman, I would further move that we issue an order of conditions to South Shore Realty Trust for the site work associated with the repair to an existing stone wall at 6 Tatasset Circle.
Were there any conditions, Bob, on that? I don't
Not
think
that I
so.
suggest.
Yeah.
No.
Yep. Okay, do we have a second?
Second,
Okay, we'll go for a roll call approval. Ken, you have to recuse yourself on this one. And Martha,
aye.
Jason,
Aye.
Bob,
Aye.
John Ostrowski, aye.
And then finally, Mr. Chairman, I move that we issue an order of conditions for, to Wheelabrator Millbury Inc. for the Phase 5, Section 7 baseline of construction at the Shrewsbury landfill.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, roll call approval. Martha,
Aye, but I wanted to know what, since I cut out, what are the plans for the composting operation? Did they mention where that was going to move?
I don't remember them mentioning it, Martha. I don't know if anybody else can recollect.
What is your concern? It will continue to, they'll continue to provide that. So it's a contract requirement with the town.
It is, okay.
I just don't know its specific location where it's going to move to.
It doesn't have any impact on granting the ordinations.
All right.
Okay, so again,
Aye.
okay. Jason,
Aye.
Bob,
Aye.
Ken,
Aye.
John Ostrowski, aye. That takes care of our orders of conditions, correct?
Yes.
And that leaves one last item, which is signing certificates of compliance. Brad, do you want to walk us through?
So we have, beginning with the first one for the Nelson Point Road subdivision. The plans that I were reviewing were as-built that were dated from November of last year. I started to look through those, had some concerns. The DPW has also been reviewing a plan set for the purpose of the street acceptance process, which ultimately goes through town meeting. So I reached out to others within our department that have been looking at that, and their plans, actually, they have more current ones than I do. There's some ongoing issues that we need to look at a little bit closer, and possibly have them make changes to in the field as well. I did reach out to the applicant. They forwarded me the most current set of plans so that I have them for the Conservation Commission now. That's what I'm told, it's the current ones. And our goal is to get together internally with everybody that's looking at this set now for, again, the street acceptance purpose, the Conservation Commission certificate of compliance, take a look closer and see what work needs to be finished. I would say at this time, I'm not ready to recommend that the commission issue a certificate on that one.
All right. 196 Oak Street.
So that's the one we talked briefly about on the remote meeting we had last time that was done solely by telephone. I did send a letter out at the end of March, I believe, to the law firm that had requested the certificate, indicated that it was one the commission's reviewed before and has not granted, and we don't have any new information on the unfinished work, and if they could please provide us with any updated information that they have on that. I have not heard back from them yet regarding that. So I would also say that that one's not ready to be issued at this moment.
Okay. And the last one, 328 Grafton Street.
Yep, that's an older one that I do recommend that we issue at this time. I'm okay with that one.
Okay. All right. you want to take a vote? Do we need a vote on that one, Brad, or just sign it?
No, you should vote on that one.
Okay. All right, Bob, you want to make a motion to approve?
I move to approve that petition.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Ken seconded. We'll do a roll call, vote. Martha for approval? Martha?
Aye.
Jason?
Aye.
Bob?
Aye.
Ken?
Aye.
John Ostrowski, aye. Okay. I think that does it. Is there anything else, Brad, tonight?
I think that covered everything that I had. Yep.
Does anyone on the commission have anything to discuss? Well, I don't hear anything, so I'm assuming not. So would someone, go ahead, Martha, what did you say?
Mr. Chairman, may I make a motion that we adjourn?
That sounds good. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we'll give that to Ken. And all in favor, we'll have to do a roll call again. Martha?
Aye.
Jason?
Aye.
Bob?
Aye.
Ken?
Aye.
John Ostrowski, aye. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Brad.
Brad.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah,
No problem.
thank
Good
you,
job.
guys.